My brothers and sisters, welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. And I'm your host, Nick de la Torre. And we're going to go now to the next right thing with Debbie and Adam. And our What Would You Do segment today is, here's the following question. A friend comes to you and says that an archangel came to them in a dream and told them to do something radical, something that would disrupt their lives and maybe even their family's life. Call in, give us your answer, your perspective on this question, 877-757-9424. Debbie and Adam, take it away.
Good morning, Nick. Thank you so much. And yes, the what would you do scenario is this. Your friend comes to you, says they had a dream, and an archangel came to them and gave them a very clear message in the dream that they had to do something that would change their life dramatically. And so the question would be, what would you do? Okay, so if you have something to say about this, please call in 877-757-9424. And we have a real life example that we're going to share. Adam is going to share it. It's very interesting. But we'd like to hear from our Morning Joy listeners. 877-757-9424. Call quickly. Okay, Adam.
You know, Deb, this is something I encounter regularly. So I think it's perhaps easy for a lot of people to imagine this. You know, it might be a little bit of a stretch, but we can imagine having a dream, and you know, a lot of us have dreamed of dead relatives, and like, oh, they came and they, said such and such to me. But imagine if you had a dream of what seemed to be like an archangel, and you wake up and you're thinking like, well, Joseph got instructions from angels, and some saints seem to get instructions from angels, and the Fatima kids, Michael was talking with them. And maybe you're inclined to say like, well, it's heaven, I whatever it is, I got to do it. I've seen that play out in a couple ways, like in the world, the regular world out here, meaning outside of prison, because I used to work in prison and psych services, where people have kind of pious ideas. I encountered one case I was asked to consult on where a person was convinced that a figure in heaven had told them to found this religious order. And they had been going to contacting the bishop's office and saying, heaven told me I need to do this, and I need, the financial backing to make this happen, and I need it, approved. And, we've got to get started right away because heaven wants this. And you basically like not drop everything, but kind of drop everything and, pay attention and do this. And that was a challenging situation in the sense of like, how do you gently be supportive and maybe be open to the chance that, maybe heaven does want that.
Right, because you don't want to get in the way of heaven.
Right. But how do you help that person if maybe it wasn't? Maybe it was just a dream. Maybe they're having what are called delusions in psychology, which are kind of like fixed ideas that resist being challenged. We see that a lot with psychosis. So like a person may hear a voice and feel like they have to obey it. So I encountered it there, and like, how do you gently, figure this out? How do you discern that? Is it legit? Is it not? And I've encountered it in working in prison. I've worked with a lot of different types of criminals, kind of in these forensic settings. And there, the actions weren't positive, they were negative. So I had a number of guys who had killed based on instructions that they had thought they had received, from a figure that they felt that they couldn't deny. A lot of times those are just voices. They don't necessarily say they're an angel, but they don't know what they are, but they feel that they have to obey them. So we know that like with psychosis that can happen. And I had some, Deb, that told me very sincerely, because they were on meds and their minds were clearer, they had gone around and begged for help at the time while they were kind of breaking down psychologically. And they'd actually like gone to police stations and said, something's wrong. I'm having these strange thoughts. Somebody's got to help me. But they hadn't committed a crime yet. So outside of referring them to the hospital, there wasn't much they could do. And they actually asked for help for weeks before they fully had their psychotic break and somebody ended up dead. So it's like super challenging there. And then I've encountered many times over the years people struggling with schizophrenia for the first time. Their first kind of schizophrenia kind of comes on typically in late 20s, early 30s. It's a very sad situation. Almost always the person's very resistant, says it's not mental illness. I promise you I'm 100% sure this is demons talking to me because they're interpreting these negative voices and trying to make sense of them. And they refuse to take the medication. And it can slip into that same kind of thing. So we dealt with a case recently, very recently, that touched on this, where crimes were happening and they felt they couldn't resist doing what they were being told. So it's super challenging, Deb, when you think this kind of experience or instruction is, you're interpreting it as coming from a heavenly source.
Right.
Well, how do you counter that? How do you ground the person? How do you question that?
Well, and
It's tough.
Yeah, it is tough. Let me present another angle, too. We just want to make sure that our Morning Joy listeners know that we have the phone lines open. If you'd like to weigh in on this scenario, 877-757-9424. Call up and speak to Tim. He's wonderful to talk to, and we'll put you on air with us and we can discuss it. But let me present another angle, Adam. After Charlie Kirk was killed, and there was all this talk on especially social media where everybody was kind of processing out what they were feeling from how shocking this was. Mm-hmm. There were, I would say, just a ton of posts where people were saying, now what can I do? I want to do something great like that. I want to do something big for God. And I could just imagine, just knowing people, in the life coaching world, the work that we do with clients all the time, and in human nature, Adam, that people are probably taking that to prayer, and even taking that when they go into a deep night's rest, and maybe asking God, can you tell me what you want me to do? I would like to do something now. It's part of that whole Charlie Kirk effect, where people feel like, well, now it's my turn to do something small and big, to make a difference in this world in a positive way. And I can just imagine that people may even say that in prayer before they go to sleep. And then what happens if they do have a dream, and it's a very vivid dream, and they feel like, okay, God just told me through an angel that I need to do this or that. And that's really interesting, because when it's coming after prayer, Adam, that makes it even harder, because when you encounter people like this who have had these they feel very strong inspirations or messages coming from heaven, and then they say, but I took it to prayer and he answered my prayer. And so when you have that, it goes along the lines, the same thing was when people try to ask for God to give them a name for their guardian angel, which is very much discouraged by the church. But it's the same thing. They'll say, well, I went to prayer and God told me. And so they automatically believe that that's the next steps they should take, because it was given from heaven above. So that's another wrinkle to it. But obviously, on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about the proper steps we should take as Christians, as Catholic Christians, when it comes to messages or inspirations or promptings, when especially it's something very big or very dramatic or radical that's going to shift where we're at. And we should really understand discernment properly. And obviously we'll be talking about that as well. But I would love for you to share that real life example that happened with this, wonderful person that had this very strong idea that they needed to do something very big for God.
Yeah. So in that case, my advice to them, as I was sitting with them and the priest who had, asked me to look at this situation, reflected on it for a moment as we were talking, and I just pointed out that if this truly was from God, and we think of like Mother Angelica and all the providential things that happened that made EWTN happen, right? Tons of things fell into place. If something really is from God, doors are going to open, pieces are going to fall into place, the resources are going to be there providentially. God's going to support a project that God wants done. And I'm not saying like, unless you win the lottery and, instantly you can do everything. It's not from God. There's subtle things, and things grow and develop over time. But I encourage them to be patient continue to pray about it and see whether there's that feedback from basically the rest of the world.
Right.
That it's not just you on your own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, can you share some of the details with this, without obviously names or anything, but some of the details of this particular example?
Well, they felt that they were supposed to found a religious order, and they didn't have, any formal training in theology. They weren't religious themselves. They were a lay person who was married, and I believe they felt that they were going to leave their marriage, drop that, and
start a religious order.
Yeah, they had already left their job. And so they were kind of like their whole life was being uprooted, and they were expecting the bishop there to be supportive and provide the funds and housing and backup to make all this happen. It was a very sad situation.
Interesting.
I think if you look at the lives of the saints, you had mentioned before the break about, well, this does happen sometimes. It happened with Joseph, with Mary, with different saints have received instructions apparently from angels, either a waking vision or a dream. I think the main theme that I see, or a pattern that I see to this, is the saint then takes it to their spiritual director, to their confessor, to their religious superior, and says, hey, I'm having this experience, I feel like I'm supposed to do such and such.
Right.
And they submit it to that authority, and they ask for feedback and guidance. And, then they are obedient to that. And what that does, I know it sounds silly, but it's so beautiful. The church has figured all this stuff out. When you have an authority that you're under, it takes the weight off your shoulders of having to figure this out yourself and say, well, should I do this, do this thing that could be really disruptive to my life? I'm not sure that it's God, and what if I'm wrong? And, I uproot everything, or I, cause problems instead of doing good. By having somebody that you submitted to and truly accept that, because God has put that superior there for you, given that kind of parental figure, whatever you want to call it, somebody who has wisdom. That's the real strength of the situation, and that was the primary advice that I gave in the example we were talking about before the break, which was pray about it, wait on God's providence, and be obedient to the church. They had submitted this idea to the church, and they didn't like the feedback they were getting, which is, after reflection, it didn't feel that this was, of God and something that was going to be done right now, but they weren't accepting that. Right. And so we need to submit and be accepting of that and patient. If it truly is God's will, it'll come up again. It'll work out in some other way.
Adam, just a couple things on that. You have to. A lot of people do not have spiritual directors.
Right.
Directors. Okay, so you have to be really careful. You can't just meet Father after Mass and drop this on him and expect an answer. What you want to do is make an appointment with a trusted priest or deacon or lay leader at the church to start to talk it over with them, and to also take it to prayer. You have to be really careful, though, because I have seen where priests were very busy and they have dismissed somebody's really strong feelings about a certain situation, and then eventually someone else of clergy picked it up and said, no, this is actually accurate. So you want to take, I agree with you, Adam, so very much that you have to pace it, wait it out, don't rush, because God will put those people in place to confirm it or to tell you it's going in the wrong direction. And then you're right, to submit and then trust that God has it covered. It does lift the weight of this. So you're spot on. Adam, I know you wanted to share a positive example about your canon law degree, but let's go to Tim, because we're going to run out of time. Tim Mateo in Findlay, Ohio. Thanks for waiting and welcome.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Go right ahead.
I'll make the question quick. Is it possible to actually miss a message, a spiritual message? Because we're so, some of us are so ingrained in not taking stock in dreams. Can we easily miss a message that's meant for us?
Well, Adam,
that's
you can answer that, but based on the study that I did on angels, guardian angels in particular, the answer is yes. We can definitely miss stuff, and that's just human nature because we're busy, we're distracted, we reject it consciously or subconsciously in a way that we just remove it. If you look at Mother Angelica, you hear the story about that she was not actually the first person that God tapped. There were, I think, 3 people before her for EWTN. She was the first one to say yes. So obviously he's tapping people all the time, and we by our own will choose to reject it or accept it or at least entertain it. The other thing too, let's keep in mind, we have to mention this on this beautiful Feast of the Archangels, the patron saint of EWTN is Saint Michael the Archangel. So that's so amazing. But Tim, that's a great question. What do you say, Adam?
Yeah, Tim, definitely we can miss things. Now, from what I know, and I do have an example from my own life with this. If we miss it, God tends to kind of give us a few more chances. We tend to get promptings from different directions. Maybe somebody else in our life comes up and says, hey, there's this opportunity. I feel like this one's for you. Maybe you should do this. And it's the very thing you were a week before feeling like maybe I should do that. Things will fall into place, and God tends to kind of knock on the door a couple times in my experience.
Right. And people you trust will confirm it. You have to remember that. Look for confirmations from people you trust, people that are, in a state of grace or trying to get in a state of grace, so you have that direct connection with God. Does that help, Timoteo?
Yeah, it does. It does. Because sometimes I'm wondering if I have.
Well, I think we all have. God's continually tapping us because he's using people to continue the work of bringing souls back to him. So absolutely. I mean, I would think so. The other thing too, Adam, we say this all the time, get in a state of grace, stay in a state of grace. What's the reason? Because you're also with that direct channel without any blocks and breaking of the friendship that you have with God, the clarity comes in that. Right, Adam? So you'll have a clearer signal it's just like tuning in the radio. You'll have a clearer signal. You can still listen to the radio when it's a little bit off on the dial. You can still listen to it, but it's crackling. You can't quite get every word. As soon as you tune it in, all of a sudden you're like, man, that's crystal clear. It's the same thing when you're in a state of grace. So Timoteo, awesome questions. Nick, that was an amazing input. Thank you so much. And what do you say, Adam, on the final 2 minutes?
Yeah, so our overarching message here this morning is, if you think you're getting promptings from heaven, whether it's in a dream or a vision or a voice, submit that to some wise authority, whether it's a friend that's wise, whether it's your parish priest, whether it's, if you're lucky enough to have a spiritual director. Bring in outside perspective, somebody that you feel is connected to God in some legitimate way, like, through their ministry, through their role in the church. Don't just run off on your own and make your own decision about it. So in the few seconds left, a positive example, I believe at least, from my life. So I've shared this before, Deb, but I was at work one day at the diocese in the middle of the morning, just working on something, and I just had this prompting, I have to say. In my heart, it's like God speaking to your heart, this impulse of like, I need to go volunteer for canon law school. And I had no knowledge of what canon law was. I had no interest in it. I had never really talked with anybody about it. And I thought, oh, that's an odd thought. And I went back to work, and it came again, go volunteer for canon law school. So I got up and I went upstairs to the judicial vicar, and I said, I'm not sure why, but I think maybe I'm supposed to be involved in canon law. And he said, actually, we have 3 of our judges are going to be retiring in the next 5 years. We're looking for people. This is the exact time to start the schooling. Let me pray about it. Turns out, Deb, of course, he came back and he said, I think you're supposed to do this. And it ended up working out. Wow. And it has now become very helpful to my life and my career and stability in my future.
Amazing. Okay, so that was our What Would You Do segment for this Monday. Thank you to everybody that participated and also in the chats. And thank you, Adam. Have a beautiful rest of your day on the Feast of the Archangels. And we'll send it back to Nick for the rest of Morning Joy.
Thank you, Debbie and Adam. Timoteo, it seems to me that the best way to miss out on messages from heaven is to not live a life of intentional prayer. God's spigot of glory and grace is always turned on. But it is only when we allow ourselves to pray that we open the nozzle on the other end of that spigot. So I want to encourage you, live a life of prayer. Did you catch this this Saturday's episode of The Spirit World? Debbie and Adam took calls, and you will want to take a look at that as well. Timoteo, thank you for the call in this segment. It is people like you that keep this locomotive moving. You're listening to Morning Joy, where truth matters. Stick around for Monsignor Charles Pope in the next up next to talk about the archangels. We'll see you in a second.